We have no items removed from the consent agenda, no legislative matters, no unfinished business. And we come to item number 12, new business. And I'd like to give the CAO an opportunity to make any comments on the motion that was referred from the previous committee of the whole meeting to today.
Great, thanks, Chair Doubt. So my full report is in the committee of the whole package and contains significant background information that led to staff bringing forward options for council consideration. However, I would like to reiterate again that the city is being forced to play an enhanced role as a landowner that is due to issues that are outside of our control. One of the things I think needs clarification is based on the feedback to date from various individuals and organizations in the community. One of the items that I feel should be addressed off the top is clarity around the definition of parks and the idea of allowing encampments and parks. Up until the recent rezoning of the lands behind the RCMP detachment, which altered the land slightly in that area, all the city lands where the encampments are currently located or have been located are zoned for park use, whether developed with recreational facilities or in a natural state, and are under the custody, care, management, and jurisdiction of the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Department. This doesn't mean that they are an actual park with recreational facilities, playing fields, or a location where a playground or walking path is located. But what it does mean is that the areas are regulated by our parks bylaw. So although the current City of Powell River Parks bylaw limits the times in which the public can access parks to between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m., they are woefully out of date and need to be amended or replaced. Any changes to the parks bylaw need to reflect that the legal landscape has changed considerably since the existing bylaw was enacted in the 1970s. So most notably, since 2008, there have been a number of decisions from the BC courts pertaining to outdoor sheltering in public spaces. These decisions are rooted in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, specifically Section 7, which states that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of person. So BC courts have determined that in the absence of sufficient access to indoor overnight shelter spaces, a municipality cannot prohibit a person from erecting a shelter on public lands to protect them from the elements without infringing that person's right to life and security of the person. So the practical effect of that is that in communities where for emergency shelter, where the demand for emergency shelter spaces exceeds the supply of such spaces, which is the case in Powell River, an outright ban on overnight sheltering in parks is unconstitutional and unenforceable. And again, our current bylaw says you can't have overnight stays in any parks. So as there have not been adequate shelter facilities since the emergency shelter closed in March, and an acknowledgement of the current state of the law, city staff have not been enforcing the current blanket prohibition against overnight sheltering in parks. But if we are to move forward with limiting anywhere where the overnight sheltering can take place, this needs to be done through amendments to the parks bylaw. And again, prior to contemplating changes to the bylaw, staff are looking for policy direction from council. So parks has a broad terminology. I think that's very important for people to understand. It doesn't mean a playground or a recreation facility or a walking trail. It's areas governed by our parks bylaw. And to date, the vast majority and all of them up until recently in terms of encampments are within that jurisdiction. So if we as the city are going to do anything to look at changes, it's changes to that parks bylaw. So I just thought that was important clarification off the top. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we're coming to council's debate on the issue. And I'm going to go around the table just in order. I'll probably start with Councillor Palm. But before we start, I'm going to remind everybody of the need, I think, to maintain decorum and respect. And that means staying quiet while members of council are speaking so that we can hear each other and so that the people in the audience can hear what council has to say. So having said that, Councillor Palm, before we go, I want to check with the corporate officer. I believe since we tabled this motion previously to a specific time, that the motion is simply on the floor now. We don't need to move the motion again.
Yes, Chair, you can pull it from the table and open debate.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure we're doing it right. Well, Councillor Palm, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. And first of all, I just want to say thanks to the public for being here today and speaking up and letting us know exactly your feelings on encampments and our parks and what's going on in our fine city of Powell River. This is not an easy subject. As I was listening to everyone speaking here today, my heart is fluttering. It just, I tell you, it just puts you in another space with what's going on out there, because I walked the encampments this morning, took a look firsthand. That's actually the first time that I have done it. I should have been there previous, but what I saw was certainly not healthy, was certainly not sanitary, and I did not feel safe just walking the trails behind the new facility. And there is a vast network of trails. There are structures, two-story structures with windows. It's just mind-boggling what's out there. And in the ravine by the complex, there's more structure. So when we dedicate 30,000 to cleanup, I don't think that goes very far. And currently what we're facing. That's the reality of the situation here. So I was asked this past week in an email to ask for correspondence to be included on today's agenda by the Westview ratepayers of concerned citizens on encampments. I took it to the start of our meeting today. I was told that I can make reference to it, but since we've received 25 other pieces of correspondence in this regard, equal treatment should be dealt with. So I'm going to read out the one correspondence that I think really highlights what we're facing and what we need to do. And I'll elaborate further after I've read this. So just bear with me as I read through this correspondence, because they did ask for it to be put on today's agenda. Dear Mayor, Council, and staff, this is from the Westview ratepayers on homeless. We are writing to express significant community concerns regarding reports that Council is considering the creation and possible expedited approval of a policy that allows city authorized encampments within city parks for unhoused individuals. The establishment of such an encampment policy represents a major shift in municipal governments with profound implications for our community. Decisions of this magnitude require careful analysis, public engagement, and due diligence. They should not be fast-tracked without a thorough examination of the associated impacts and obligations. We urge Council to fully access the significant financial liabilities of establishing and maintaining any authorized encampment site. These costs may include, but are not limited to, washroom and shower facilities, waste management, site maintenance, security measures, emergency response requirements, and liability insurance. A comprehensive financial analysis should be completed and made available to the public before any commitment is made. Furthermore, we seek clarity on legal compliance and enforcement. Illicit drug use remains prohibited under provincial and federal law. Should an encampment policy be implemented? How will the city ensure the existing bylaws relating to the substance use, public safety, and community standards are enforced within a city-authorized encampment? Residents deserve assurance that any policy includes clear and effective mechanisms to prevent normalization of facilitation of illegal activities on municipal property. In addition, we believe that designated encampment areas should not be considered until all existing shelter capacity has been fully utilized. Before any discussion of city-authorized encampment proceeds, Council should provide clear evidence that available shelter beds, including those at the Driftwood Shelter, are consistently at capacity and unable to meet community needs. Existing shelter infrastructure should be fully utilized and evaluated before the city considers establishing new encampment sites. We further maintain that public parks should not be considered as potential locations for authorized encampments. Parks are intended to serve as shared recreational spaces for residents of all ages and abilities, supporting recreation, community events, tourism, and quality of life. The long-term preservation of these public amenities should remain a priority, and alternative locations should be explored before any parkland is considered for non-recreational use. Given the magnitude of this policy change, we believe the matter should be subject to a broad public consultation process, or where legally permissible, a referendum held in conjunction with the next municipal election. A decision of this scale should not be made without meaningful public participation and the informed consent of Powell River residents. On possible referendum question could be such as, do you support a city implementing a policy to establish a city authorized encampment for unhoused individuals on a city-owned property in Powell River? Given the complexity of the issues, we strongly recommend that the city establish a dedicated task force on housing and public safety. This body should include representation from key stakeholders, including the Chamber of Commerce, ratepayer associations, social service providers, public health officials, law enforcement, and community representatives. And mandate should include 1, evaluating appropriate locations, excluding municipal parks, and prioritizing alternatives for high-use recreational areas. 2, assessing existing shelter capacity and utilization rates before considering designated encampment sites. 3, developing clear operating rules and bylaw enforcement protocols. 4, assessing the feasibility and effectiveness of substance-free dry encampment models. 5, reviewing public safety considerations and community impacts. And 6, determining the full fiscal implications for the city and its residents. If council determines that an encampment on city-owned property is necessary, we recommend it is authorized only as a temporary pilot project with a definite 6-month period. At the conclusion of this period, the initiative should be subject to comprehensive evaluation, including measurable outcomes, financial reporting, public consultation, and council review before any decision is made regarding continuation or permanence. We respectfully request a written response addressing the concerns and recommend put forth and confining council's intended process. I hope staff will take it upon themselves with the help of council, if necessary, to respond to this letter, because it says everything that it needs to be on this subject. This is a very well-written piece of material because it defines what we're dealing with. And it's multifaceted, and there are so many twists and turns to this nightmare that it is very, very difficult for council and staff and the public, everybody involved, to deal with. We understand that. So when it comes to making motions, I'm going to hope council will consider, not since CAO Sundance has just pointed out that the location behind the new facility on Barnett has been removed from park. That area probably will not be sufficient to deal with such. And that was the area I was first thinking about. But now what I'm thinking about is, in terms of facilities, showers, food, housing and whatnot, the area up by our yard, which was referred to as the dog pound or whatever that was utilized previously, could be an area that is not impacting parks, our children, or our residents to any great degree. That is the area that I would first recommend to look at, and we can go forward from there. But I would limit it to 1 to start with for a definite, finite period of time. Thank you, Councillor Dowd.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. And as Councillor Palm did, I wanted to thank everybody for showing up telling us what you told us and allowing us to hear you. And all of the letters that were written in, there were many good letters. They'll be published on our website that came in as well with many perspectives. I originally asked us to postpone this for 2 weeks, and here we are at this new date. One of the reasons I did that was I didn't feel I had what I need to make decisions at that time. And I agree with most of you that we need a better process for coming up with policies that are not just about what the city does in our jurisdiction, but having a better integrated plan that is bigger than just the city. We can't really do much without also accepting offloading of costs that should be covered through a more comprehensive strategy from the province. We've had to struggle a lot to try and get what we need from provincial resources to handle this struggle, not just homelessness, but the opioid crises. We've got resources. We've been improving them as we go along. We've been trying really hard and doing continuous improvement. It's not good enough. We still need to know how best to handle this in a humane, comprehensive way. I hear the folks who are telling me you can't push people together that don't want to be together. So I don't want to do that. I hear my staff when they tell us we have significant costs, responses, fire, all of the things going on, cleanup happening already, and there needs to be some policy around it, and our bylaws are outdated. So what I want to do is vote against this motion today, and then perhaps put some thought into a process that gets us there with a more comprehensive look at the various different layers and how we can encourage good results without and take the minimum of downloading of cost that we can while still being humane. And so I don't think that's voting for status quo as policy, but I'm in favor of figuring out a policy development framework that is inclusive and gets us a better strategic response to what's happening in our community. So I'm voting against the motion if that's what we're debating. And then how we move forward after that, I guess we would need to put a motion on the floor at that time. Is that correct, Chair?
Perhaps we should go around the table. We'll see what people have to say first. And then if you get to moving the motion at some time, it could be defeated, or amendments could be made, whatever council chooses. But I'd like to go around the table and let all the councillors be heard from first. So, Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Chair. Would also like to say, I would like to say that I also appreciate having the opportunity to speak here, just as various people have who presented themselves at the lectern here today said, because it's a right of all of us to contribute what we think, what we feel. A lot of those comments struck pretty close to home for me. Not that there have been homeless people in my family, but there certainly have been deaths that are directly result of addictions. So, and I would bet that there is probably not a single person in this room whose lives have not been touched that way. I remember something that was said: shelter is not a solution to homelessness. It's not housing. And housing is not the whole solution either. We all know that. How many people have stated that? And I think that of all the correspondence that I read that came from many people, I think this may be the first time where every single one and every statement that was made here agreed. on one really important and central element, and that is that we need to work more on this. But also something that's really clear to me is that we're not at a solution, and that was in our report, the report provided by our CAO as well, very clearly, that other jurisdictions who have tried to do whatever they've tried to do over years now, and a lot of them before we got to this sad state, there's been general failure, a lot of failure and minor pieces of success, but those pieces of success have mostly related to involving people who find themselves in housing somehow in a road forward, call it recovery, whatever. I think recovery is something that has a very, very broad definition in my mind. Recovery from what? Recovery to what? So there's only one thing that I can support, and I tried to figure out a way for council to support or sponsor town halls, some kind of community assembly work, and that wasn't within our capacity. Apparently, we understood from analysis of our priorities some time ago, but that's the only thing that I can support at this point, is some way where we can work together as a community, be it town halls or community assemblies. And there's a lot of work going on with community assemblies through our province, targeting various issues. So that isn't addressed here. What is addressed is the insufficiency of the bylaw. And one thing I absolutely know, having worked with policy for many years, and it started long before I got to this table, was that when you have policy that doesn't work, then it gives you more freedom. So one thing I'm really quite clear on is that if we do not pass this motion, our staff still has ways of dealing with whatever they need to deal with, and that's fire, police, ambulances, provincial, so we don't have any real connection there, but they're involved as well. Bylaw. And we innovate when we're faced with a challenge. But what we really need to do is we need to have more dialogue that results in us having a clear understanding of what we can do. Now we know at this table all the things we can't do, and money has been talked about already. That's a hugely limiting factor. So we have to get around that somehow. I grew up in this community where there was huge amount of volunteering, and there still is. Mr. Gelber there is working on something I happen to know about that could be a possible opportunity, and he lives right next door to big encampments. So there are people already working in this community, and I can't see any other possible solution, but it's outside the box that we're in as a council right now. So it has to involve greater resources, and that's community organizations. Already this community is working together. The Westview Ratepayers is doing great work. You know, it's a little ragged at times. It's always a little ragged. This is about as ragged as it gets. I thought I'd left this behind when I left downtown Vancouver working as a paramedic. And here it is here now. So I can't support this motion, and I'm not worried that that's going to limit staff. Really what it will do is it'll give staff, the staff that we have, we'll just have to figure it out within the limits of what we have. Now, if we don't have policy at all, we still have to look after a situation. There's still all sorts of other policy that allows the people who are involved to do whatever it is and innovate. And I'm really hoping that having worked in the emergency community, I know the people in that community are highly caring and do innovate. just have to mention one more thing and two more things. One is we've already approved the fire smarting. We've already approved some budget. Oh, that's going to go to council still, but we're sending that to council. This is the only question now. So I'm pretty confident we will approve that. I don't know. I believe that so we're taking tiny steps, but we need to take the steps together. I also just want to mention just a tiny correction to something that Councillor Elliott said, and that is that letters are published on our website, and that is no longer true.
Oh.
And yeah, they're not. It stopped a few months ago. And I support that because some of the things that are written to us, I really want to see people be able to write to us with open hearts. So I am hoping, and I am committed to finding a way to work for council, this table, to work in a more integrated way with this community. And I hope that can happen quickly. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Chair. So I think a couple people who spoke mentioned that it was their first time at a council meeting. And so I want to explain a little bit about where we are. There's two different types of council meetings. There are committees of the whole, which is where we are today, and council meetings. So no final decisions get made at committee of the whole, which is today. What we do is we vote on things and we send them to council. So the discussion that we're having today is not a final decision. That would then go to council at a future meeting, likely in August is our next, because it's usually committee of the whole. Items get sent to the next council meetings not in the same week, and our next meeting's not until August. And so there's actually a lot, whatever gets decided tonight or not decided tonight, there's a lot more time for people to share their input over the next few weeks. And so you'll see a decision tonight, but it's not a final decision. It's a decision to send this to council for a final debate, and it allows a little bit more discussion. So just want to make sure that people who are new to council meetings understand that. In listening to the speakers earlier today, it was really clear for me that there's a lot of compassion in the room. And also there's not two sides. I think everyone acknowledges that it's like a really complex issue. There's no easy solution. People may have opinions on what a solution is not, but it's a really hairy challenge, and there's a lot of understanding that it's a really complex issue. It's not, one decision is not going to be a magic bullet to be a solution. There's also a lot of interest in broader input and having meaningful engagement for any decision that does get made. So that's one thing I heard. Heard concerns about safety and drug paraphernalia, especially as it relates to children and parks. And so I want to reiterate what our CAO and other councillors have mentioned. We're not talking about parks in terms of like where there's playgrounds or where there's infrastructure. Much of, for example, Millennium Park, that is a park. The forests are part of the park, and so even if it's not visible from the street and it's in the trees, that's part of our park. And so I am definitely not interested in setting up an encampment down at Willingdon Beach or on a ball field to be.
I'm starting to hear a lot of noise from the audience. And when the audience starts getting louder than the councillors are speaking, it's hard to listen. I'm going to ask people to keep the sound down and listen to what's going on in the debate.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, I share those concerns. I'm not interested in any solution that leads to risks to children and people using our public parks. And so often we're talking about forested areas, and so I wanted to note that. There's concerns about supporting the dignity of people living in encampments. I was incredibly touched by Robert's closing comments. And I think a lot of people in this room were, he got the largest applause. Everyone showed a lot of bravery to speak in front of council, but I think, you know, his points were well taken, were very well taken. I think there's concerns about cost to the city and perhaps that we should be investing in addiction facilities or mental health as well. And in terms of overall financial support, I mentioned this in a previous committee of the whole, in terms of financial support that the city has committed to issues related to addiction and homelessness, I would say the two highest areas that we've invested in, one is in enforcement in terms of funding RCMP, and two is in recovery in supporting MCLAT to the tune of, I believe it's over $800,000. The scale of this council and supporting that work is quite high. And I agree that recovery is very important to invest in. I also heard that shelters don't work for everyone. And so I understand there's a little bit of, there's interest in getting a sense of like why the shelter is not being used. There are, there's rules that don't work for everyone. Even if whether or not the shelter is fully used, my understanding from the encampment response task force, I forget their name, there are 77 named individuals who are associated with encampments and only 40 beds in the shelter. So irregardless of how much the shelter is used, there's 37 named individuals who would not be able to access the shelter. And so we'll have to, we can't infringe on that right to liberty of security and life. I heard the phrase displacement is not a housing strategy, and that really struck me. I'll get to that maybe a little bit more later, but that really struck me. There were a couple of suggestions of specific places, for example, behind the police station, or Councillor Palm mentioned the former dog pound. And also heard from Westview ratepayers and from Robert and from another individual that that a centralized model doesn't work for people, and might replicate some of the same challenges that are leading some people to not use the shelter. And so I don't necessarily see that as a solution. So personally, when I think about the motion that's on the floor right now is the version that was moved at a previous meeting was to prohibit overnight sheltering in certain parks and public spaces and allow it in others, and to bring back the bylaw for a future council meeting for review. And so I won't support this motion for a couple of reasons that might differ from other people's, but might result in the same outcome. I'm not interested in the city increasing its responsibility in managing homelessness and all of the costs that are associated with it. It's not our area of expertise. There are people that do that work better. And if there is a situation where we do increase our involvement, those solutions need to be focused on what will work and what will be used by those who have made their homes in encampments. And so spending a lot of money and time on something that will not get used is not in anyone's interest, whether people who are in encampments or people who are concerned about taxes. I'm also not interested in approaching this as an enforcement issue. I don't want to get into a place where it feels like we are criminalizing figuring out how to survive the next night. You know, if we create a setup with restrictions, for example, cleaning up every morning or having to move along every morning, what we'll see is similar to what's happening in the shelter right now. You know, a lot of the people, some people who might be able to use a shelter don't because of rules related to, you know, couples not being able to stay together, or some people have pets, some people need in and out privileges. And so if we set up a designated space or spaces that have restrictions, people will also choose not to use those spaces and will end up being pushed further into the forest and further away from resources. So I don't think that's the solution either. unfortunately, like this is what I heard repeatedly. There's no easy solution to this. All I know is right now I won't support this motion. I think the only thing I would support before further input from those most impacted would be status quo, and that's not great. It's not a solution, but it at least gives staff direction as to what the will of council is. The only other motions that I would consider putting forward right now are related to the costs and the downloading of this sort of work from the province. And so I would, after this motion's consider or ask that council send a letter to the Minister of Housing and the Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction requesting financial support needed to address encampment response, noting the 12-month plus closure of our emergency shelter, which is generally the responsibility of BC Housing, and that council direct staff to send invoices to the province for costs related to encampment response. So like I'm not coming here with like a shiny solution, but the motion that's on the floor doesn't sit with me well. I understand the rationale behind it, and I understand why it might make sense for some people. But in my role, I look at what we got in front of us, and I don't support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to get some clarification on some stuff, and maybe even just reiterate or rephrase some of the stuff that the CAO just shared, because I have a feeling that some of it might have been missed, or repetition can sometimes sink things in a little bit more as well. Councillor Isaacson mentioned a little bit just now, but correct me if I'm wrong in my summary here, but the CAO had shared that the parks include all forested area, not just the playgrounds and the rec sites, but everything basically with trees and grass that doesn't have a building on it is likely zoned park in most of our community. And that currently all the encampments that are in existence, mostly over the last year since our shelter was originally closed, are all on existing park land. And the catch-22, I guess, behind this is that our current bylaw, our parks bylaw, which is originally 50 years old and was amended in 99, prohibits overnight use between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., which would then in other words, prevent camping. But the Charter of Rights and Freedoms also restricts the community from limiting someone from having shelter over their head. So we can have a bylaw that says no camping, but we can't actually stop someone if that's the only option for shelter. And so the CAO has given me a head nod. I felt that summary was important just to lay it out. So the two questions I have, I guess, is this almost seems like a two-pronged motion, is that we need to update our bylaw because the parks bylaw is 50 years old, and funny enough, written on a font that I think our current youth wouldn't be able to read because it's so cursive. So regardless, that it sounds like that bylaw probably would need to be updated regardless of our unhoused situation. Am I correct in that?
Thank you through the chair, Councillor Almeida. As we noted in the earlier report, it is a very old bylaw and we do need to update it. The concern staff had was without dealing with the encampment issue, we didn't want to try to deal with all the other issues because it would bog down the process too much. So the short answer is yes, we do need to update it. The longer answer is that if it includes any sort of restrictions on camping, it's going to bog down the process.
Okay, thank you. And my second follow-up to that is, I guess earlier, I think it was this year or sometime in the last 12 months, council approved a budget for 2027 for Parks and Trails master plan. And I'm wondering, I guess, would that plan, or the maybe is the rec plan, maybe, okay, sorry, too many plans in our head. So, but it has something to do with a little bit of park space. Would that master plan potentially involve a revisit of the parks bylaw if nothing happened to get done in 26?
I would say no. I would say it focused more on facilities up around the recreation complex as opposed to trails in our entire community and parks in our entire community.
So what would be the case then if council wished to give a thumbs up to update the parks bylaw, but leave status quo on the overnight camping situation? Like, is that even a possible amendment?
I would say that staff have started the work behind the scenes on updating the parks bylaw anyway, and as addressed in the earlier report, we've identified some things that are moving forward. We don't necessarily need council to say go and move that forward because it's an operational item that we know that needs to be brought forward anyway. But again, the hope of staff is just to try to get a little bit of clarity because we feel that it will get potentially bogged down in the process. And so it doesn't mean we're not going to stop working behind the scenes on updating that parks bylaw, but it's probably going to be a parallel process depending on what outcomes of this conversation are.
Thank you. I think in terms of the motion on the floor, yeah, I don't feel comfortable moving forward with it right now. I know at our last meeting 2 weeks ago, we passed a motion to for our UBCM meetings to try to get minister meetings, and one of those motions was to request a financial assistance to help with any part of the process that might be forthcoming, and which kind of answers a little bit of what Councillor Isaacson just suggested as well. So at this point, I don't feel comfortable moving forward on this current motion, and we'll see what else comes up.
Thank you. So my turn. And believe it or not, I don't often write speeches for council. I usually go off the cuff, and it's because I'm not that good at reading, actually. But I did write some yesterday, and it's kind of surprising that it addresses a lot of the issues that were brought up by different people here today. Well, first off, I want to make it clear what we are doing. And the motion in the package is that we create a bylaw to prevent sheltering in parks and public places and to allow it in others. That's a change to the existing bylaw. The existing one says you just can't do it. This one would allow it in other places. I disagree with that idea for several reasons. First is that the solution that is proposed isn't a solution to the real problem that we have. Simply proposes to move people from one place to another because of various concerns over encampments. The fact is that people are homeless here for economic and social reasons. This proposal will not do anything to change that. The fact is that in Canada, the law protects the rights of people to shelter in public places where they don't have access to safe and adequate housing and supports. I know that there are those who don't like that, but it's the law. In a recent case, court case overturned a bylaw to evict homeless people from a city property, and it ruled that pursuant to Section 52.52 of the Constitution Act 1982, the bylaw is unconstitutional and is of no force and effect. Justice Gibson said in that decision some important things. Homeless people are not the other, they are us. Homelessness is a fact on the ground. It is not going away in the proximate future, and an ostrich approach will not suffice. And I agree with all of those statements. Fact is, even with the new driftwood shelter, there is not enough space to accommodate everyone indoors. This is my first time in years. I've been on council for 8 years, and I was attending council meetings for a couple of years before that. This is the first time every bit of correspondence that I have received about a council issue has said the same issue at the end of the day. They say a lot of different things, have a lot of different reasons, but they all say We need more consultation. As I said, people are talking past each other, in my opinion, and surprisingly, almost all of us are saying the same thing if we stop and listen. I think we need to pause and rethink where this is going. If we want to find a better option for sheltering those who are unhoused in our community, I believe that we're capable of doing that if we work together. We need to actively involve the community, the housed people, the homeless people, businesses, ratepayers groups, and volunteer organizations, and we need to involve them all representationally in an appropriate group to talk about this. I don't like the word task force because that's been used and limited in a whole bunch of circumstances. I heard Councillor Southcott talking about community assemblies, and those actually sound like a pretty good idea until you look into the effort it takes to actually get a random sampling of people and the time it takes to do a good community assembly, to do all the training, the consideration, and the determination of a solution at the end. They tend to cost a lot of money. But I think we need to involve all of those people that I've talked about, including the people in encampments, homeless people of all definitions, and everybody else in the community to get to a solution. That's why I'm in favor of referring this motion back to staff or simply defeating it. If we defeat it, it can come back again after more careful consideration, and we can talk about how we want to get the input of everybody in the committee. But whichever way we do it, I can't support the resolution the way it is, and I will vote against it. And I'm interested in seeing if anybody has any other proposals. So, second time speakers, I think we'll start with Councillor Palm and try to go around in the same circle again and see if everybody is happy with that. You don't have to speak for a second time if you don't want to. Councillor Palm.
Chair, and that is, I just want to go through what I've just heard from various councillors and just a couple of points.
You need the microphone, Councillor Palm.
Right. Just a couple of points that council have made here are very pertinent to this. Obviously, I've heard defer the motion. Secondly, engage the public and study what has to be done has been done in other cities to and glean the best approach. That hasn't been done at all. We should be looking far and wide for what's working out there. Thirdly, apply to BC Housing and the government for cleanup costs and costs associated with what we're dealing with, because this is just another download from the higher up that I am not supportive of. And lastly, I'd like to direct staff to focus on a temporary fix of supplying the dog pound for showers, for food service, so that the people that need it the most and are afraid to go into the facilities that have been built have access to that. So that's what I've heard here today at this table. And in terms of the correspondence that I've received today, my reply was this. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Compassion is seriously an important aspect of ultimately what needs to be done. However, the greater concern is that the numbers we are dealing with on this front are steadily increasing. When we shut down the place on Joyce, there was 20. Now we're up to 77. Where are they coming from? The more you build or put in place, the greater the negative impact on our community. A small town such as ours does not have the resources or the capacity, at our hospital, for example, to take on more. So that's what we're dealing with here. It needs to be said, and we need further study. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. That's just some informational pieces to add, and then my opinion on how we should proceed would be to call the question. I think it will be defeated. I don't think postponing it is the right way to go. And the reason I don't think that is because the fundamental policy that is within that motion, I think is not favored by council. And so there's no point in postponing it because we're looking for something different. And so my preference would be to vote on that and then put something forward that is closer to what it is we would like.
Well,
Pardon?
I thought I heard you say you wanted to call the question.
I said that would be my preference on how to move forward, but before we get to that, the Driftwood shelter hasn't been at full capacity, but if you compare its usage to summertime usages of our other shelter when we had it, it's at higher capacity than we've ever seen it at this time of year. And so on its busiest nights, it's housing 36 to 37 people out of the 40 with very little room left. On its least busy nights, it's down a bit. And so I attend the community action team meetings regularly where we get updates on all of these things. It's a group of people that operate housing, that are school board, that are Ministry of Children and Families, Vancouver Coastal Health, fire services, all of the folks who are currently working on these issues meet in it and talk about updates and how things are going. And so one of the updates I recently heard was the capacity of our current shelter is reaching, it's getting very close to full capacity now, and it's slowly ramping up. And so it opened, and some folks tried it out and they aren't there, then they find it's too difficult to go the night without smoking and they can't go in and out. So the lack of in and out privileges prevents that from being comfortable for them. Some of the other reasons were listed in the reports. It doesn't work for everybody, but when it does reach full capacity, those that aren't in there will be at the same situation they were before we had a shelter. There'll be nowhere for them to go. The concept of herding people together, while it sounds administratively simpler, it completely accepts liability by the city for what happens in those spaces if we create them. And that's a problem to my way of thinking, because that liability means that you're required to provide the foreseeable need of services that we don't currently provide. That's an expense that isn't coming from the province. We don't have arrangements with housing or anybody to cover that. And so we're not really equipped to move forward without some kind of funding to try this policy, even, to my way of thinking. So I'd like to move on with calling the vote and then see what we can put forward as far as process that includes inclusion and where we are trying to get to.
Old-fashioned Robert's Rules of Order training says that once you've spoken to a motion, it's bad form to call the question right away. But we've heard from everybody on council, and I would like to suggest that we vote, make a decision on this matter, and go on with it. Anybody object? Pardon me?
Things I'd like to say.
Okay, we've got all night.
Thank you, Chair. There's just three things that I wanted to share that two that I forgot to share the first time, and one in response to new information shared. So one is I did want to acknowledge the staff work that has been going into the encampment response, and also the work that went into this report. I thought the report was very thorough, it was realistic, it was compassionate, not easy at all. This is like I said, a thorny issue, hairy issue, whatever. It's a very complex issue, and you are seeking council direction. There's a bunch of options. We recommend this one, but tell us what you want to do. And so that's the hard work of staff trying to do the best they can, based on, looking at what other communities are doing, understanding how the workload on staff of dealing with things as they currently are. So I wanted to express appreciation for that. I also was remiss to share the first time around, we received a number of letters, and there was one from the Coalition to End Homelessness that had collected some quotes from unhoused community members about the proposed recommendations, and I just wanted to make sure that these words were spoken aloud. And so here's some direct quotes from people who are currently unhoused. Bylaw is already kicking people out of parks. We are also concerned about the impacts to the environment. We are willing to help with cleanup. This direction is heartless. We don't want to be around kids in our current state of being unhoused. We want to stay put. We are safe, established, and hidden. People want to be included in conversations. Why don't we help each other instead of doing things like this to people? We have to be able to exist somewhere. Decamping is too much work. This decision, if it happens, will force me to move further away and away from services. So repeating some of the sentiments that we've heard throughout this evening. And the last thing that I want to share is just about numbers in terms of homelessness and the belief that this is a new issue or this is an imported issue. There was actually a 2011 report coordinated by the city. So this is 15 years ago that at that time had estimated 250 absolute and hidden homelessness. So these are people that are couch surfing or already in their vehicles or in the forests. And I think 270 or 275 who are relatively homeless, meaning that they're one crisis or one paycheck away from being unhoused. And so this is a really long-standing issue, and it comes with boom and bust of economy and other things happening in society. So it's not a problem unique to us, but it is a problem that people from here are dealing with. So this is a long-standing, not imported local issue that communities across our province and the country are dealing with. This is, again, not unique to us, and it's been a long-standing issue that's really coming to a crux right now. It's becoming more visible, and so people feel people are impacted by that visible nature of it, and that's real. But it's always been here. It just was a bit more hidden. Thank you.
Anyone else? I don't see any other hands. So. You're pointing at the clock. I'm thinking about the clock too. That's why I'd like to get to calling the question. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Motion is defeated.